Hey guys, tonight we're heading to a place so hot your sandals would probably melt by lunchtime. The sun is high, the horizon shimmers with heat, and you're walking, yes, walking through the arid lands of ancient Persia. Think cracked earth underfoot, the air vibrating with heat, and that constant dusty wind that never seems to cool anything down. Now imagine someone telling you, hey, want some ice? You'd probably laugh or faint, or both, because the idea of having a frozen anything out here without electricity or even basic fans sounds like pure fantasy. And yet, the Persians did it. They made ice in the middle of the desert, and they didn't just make it, they stored it, transported it, and even turned it into desserts. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're already tucked in, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fun to picture this sleepy little global community. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the dusty flatlands just outside an ancient Persian city, maybe Yazd, or perhaps an even older outpost long since forgotten by name. It's midday, and the sun is an unrelenting overseer glaring down from a cloudless sky. There's no shade, no breeze, no escape. Just the smell of sun-baked clay and dry herbs and the distant clink of metal against stone as someone somewhere works through the heat. And then you see it. In the distance, a strange structure rises from the scorched land, half buried, half above ground. It doesn't belong to any modern idea of architecture. It's bulbous, almost like a dome or a mound with a curious little vent crowning its peak. You'd think it was a shrine, maybe a granary. But no, this is your first glimpse of a yakhchal. But not yet. That comes later. First, you've got to get there. Your path is lined with the faded remnants of clay walls and goat paths. A few wiry trees shake in the breeze like they're just barely hanging on. Occasionally, you pass a small dwelling, its thick mud brick walls the only thing keeping the oven-like heat at bay. Someone nods to you from a shaded doorway, holding a jug of water pulled fresh from an underground channel. You blink, wondering if you're hallucinating. Underground water. Yep, welcome to Persia. As you keep walking, something odd happens. The air begins to change. It's subtle at first, but real. The oppressive dryness eases just a touch. You feel the slightest brush of coolness. And then it hits you, a faint, steady breeze that doesn't match the chaotic hot wind you've been trudging through all day. You turn your head following the airflow like a scent. That's when you see the first one, a towering chimney-like structure with open slats near the top. It's catching the wind, you realize, channeling it downward. Like a reverse fireplace, but instead of smoke, it's drawing in fresh air. This is your first encounter with a badger the wind catcher, a marvel of passive cooling invented long before thermostats or ductwork. Historians still argue whether wind catchers originated in Persia or earlier in Egypt, but in Iran, they reached their full expression. Tall, narrow towers oriented just so built to intercept the prevailing winds and funnel them downward into the living spaces below. And these weren't just glorified chimneys, they were precise, even artistic, using internal veins and water basins to amplify the chill. As you step beneath one, the sensation is immediate. The temperature drops by several degrees. The sweat on your back turns from a nuisance to a quiet blessing. And here in the land of heat stroke and cracked lips, someone figured out how to turn architecture into air conditioning. You sit for a moment under the wind catcher, letting its breath wash over you. Around you, the city continues its slow rhythm. Donkeys clop through narrow alleys. Vendors argue over cinnamon prices. A child scampers past with a fig in each hand. No one rushes. The heat won't allow it. Still, that breeze lingers soothing and steady. And somewhere ahead behind the city walls, the real miracle waits. A domed mountain of mud brick and ice that cannot exist. But the Persians, they built it anyway. You leave the calming shade of the wind catcher, stepping back into the dusty heat. Your feet crunch against the sand-packed road, the kind that feels baked into a single hard sheet by years of sun. But you're getting closer now. You can see it clearly ahead. The structure you glimpsed earlier, half buried in the earth, now looms tall and round. It's not smooth like modern domes. No, this one is textured, built from sun-dried mud bricks, layered in a careful spiral. This is the Yakhchal, literally translated ice pit. You can't help but raise an eyebrow. There's no frost here, no glistening icicles, no snowy signage. Just a quiet dome in the middle of a sandy lot. But the locals know what it is. A young boy runs past you waving a handful of chopped mint. He calls back. They're opening the vault tonight and disappears into the alley with a giggle. As you walk the perimeter of the Yakhchal, You notice how perfectly it's positioned. The entrance is narrow and low to the ground, angled away from the sun. Around the back, the base dips below the desert surface, disappearing into a cavernous trench. You step closer and feel it again, that whisper of coolness. The air here is different. You duck into the entrance and descend a short ramp that curves into darkness. Your footsteps echo off the walls. It's cooler by the second, and your skin prickles with goosebumps. Inside, the space opens up. The ceiling arcs high above you, tracing the contour of the dome. The floor packed with ancient layers of straw clay, and beneath them, if the season is right, ice. Actual blocks of it, carved and stacked like treasure. Historians still debate just how cold the inside of a yakhchal could get, especially in peak summer. Some claim the internal temperature could drop to freezing thanks to the combination of underground insulation, evaporative cooling, and night-chilled water. Others argue it rarely dipped below 5 degrees, but whatever the exact numbers, it was cold enough. Cold enough to store ice harvested in winter, and even make new ice at night. Because here's the real twist, the yakhchal wasn't just a fridge, it was also a freezer. You find a small side chamber open to the sky. The walls are lined with dark plaster, and in the center there's a shallow depression. A few drops of water linger there. At night in winter, the basin would be filled and left under the open sky. The desert's bone-dry air and clear skies allowed rapid radiative cooling, sometimes enough to freeze the surface. Workers would scrape up the ice before dawn, adding it to the main chamber. This process repeated night after night. By the time summer arrived, the yakhchal held tons of frozen slabs, some up to a meter thick, wrapped in straw and stacked like sacred offerings to the gods of comfort. And comfort was exactly what they were going for, because this wasn't just a survival hack, this was luxury. You sit on a cool stone bench inside the chamber, leaning back against the mud brick wall. You think about the engineering behind this miracle, the angle of the dome to minimize sun exposure, the thick insulation, the clever air vents. There's no mortar here, just sheer precision and clever physics. Outside the world boils, inside you could nap with a smile. And here's the kicker. These weren't isolated experiments. Hundreds of yakhchals dotted Persian cities and trade routes. Some were public, others were built by wealthy families or religious institutions. They served ice-preserved food and even stored bodies for burial ceremonies. You run your fingers across the bricks still cool after all these centuries. And you wonder how many feet have passed this same threshold. How many sweaty travelers were offered a sweet, icy drink and a breath of relief in a place that shouldn't have allowed it. Oh, and the shape of the dome. Historians still argue whether it was purely structural or if its curvature enhanced the air circulation inside. Some say the paraboloid shape helped direct cool air down and warm air up, expelling heat through the top vent like a chimney. Others think it was just the best way to stop the thing from collapsing. Whatever the reason, it worked. You stand one last glance at the pale light trickling down from the vent far above. It casts a circle of brightness on the packed earth floor like a spotlight for ghosts. And you step back out into the sun, your skin now fully aware of what it's missing. Outside, the wind has picked up. You can see palm trees swaying in the distance. And there's a smell in the air, faint but unmistakable, a hint of sweetness and something floral. You're about to find out what ice tastes like in ancient Persia. You follow your nose through a narrow alley, its walls so high and close that even the brutal sun struggles to squeeze through. The air here is heavy with anticipation, and a trace of cardamom. You turn a corner and emerge into a shaded courtyard, bustling with quiet purpose. Clay pots clink, ladles stir, and somewhere behind a curtain, someone's humming. A bearded man waves you over with a crooked smile. "You came for the cold rose, didn't you?" He chuckles already, scooping something pale and glistening into a shallow bowl. You take it. Your fingers tingle against the clay. The contents shimmer faintly in the light, a mound of creamy, semi-frozen faluda, one of the earliest known ice-based desserts. Vermicelli noodles, rosewater, and syrup, all chilled with blocks cut from the yakhchal that very morning. You sit cross-legged beside a fountain. Yes, there's a fountain here, burbling merrily, like the desert isn't watching, and take a bite. The sweetness hits first, chased by the unmistakable floral kiss of rose. Then comes the crunch of shaved ice, and you blink. It's absurdly refreshing, almost suspiciously so. You glance around the courtyard. This is no royal palace. These are common folk traders, scribes, children with tangled hair and sticky fingers. And yet here they are enjoying ice, in a desert, with flair. Historians still argue whether desserts like Faluda were reserved for elites or whether they became accessible to the broader public through communal yakhchals. Some point to records of street vendors hawking sweet frozen treats in crowded markets. Others think that was poetic exaggeration meant to elevate the grandeur of Persian cities in travelers' tales. But what's clear is the ancient Persians didn't just preserve ice, they celebrated it. A woman nearby is crushing saffron with a flat stone, adding a pinch of it to what looks like frozen custard. We call it bastani sonati, she explains when she sees you watching. Real ice cream, not the kind your phone sells you. She grins and offers you a taste. It's thicker than the Faluda, richer, and somehow cold enough to make your teeth tingle. There's a chewy texture to it thanks to the inclusion of salep, a starchy flour made from orchid roots. And oh, the flavor, saffron pistachio and that ever-present rose. The effect is like licking the memory of spring. You can't help but marvel. These aren't frozen peas and leftover stew shoved into a survival box. This is art, a love letter written in ice. As you finish the bowl, an old man tells you about his grandfather's job. He was a winter cutter, he says proudly. Walked 10 miles to the hills, carved ice with copper tools, and hauled it back wrapped in reeds. People would cheer when they saw the camels arrive. You imagine the scene, a slow procession through the sand, each beast carrying slabs of frozen silence. The blocks were packed in layers of straw and ashes stacked into the yakhchal before dawn. These icy caravans weren't just practical, they were performances. Some cities even held festivals when the first shipments arrived, complete with music garlands and buckets of melting joy. You sip from a chilled copper cup handed to you by a child. It tastes of cucumber and mint. There's laughter in the courtyard now. A rooster tries to sneak a bite of someone's lunch and is chased off to general amusement. The fountain keeps singing, and for a moment you forget the desert beyond these walls. Historians still debate the exact ingredients used in ancient Persian frozen recipes. Some rely on poetry and secondhand accounts to piece together the flavors. Others dismiss the flowery descriptions as too unreliable. But one thing is certain, the people here didn't see cold as mere survival. They made it delicious. A cat brushes past your leg tail held high. A girl sets a bowl of ice water beside it with casual generosity. You smile. Somewhere someone is slicing watermelon, and you catch a whiff of basil on the breeze. You lean back against the cool stone bench, watching sunlight dance across the courtyard tiles. And just beyond the walls, you know the Yakhchal stands silent, domed, eternal. A quiet promise that even in the driest heat, there's always a way to find sweetness. And ice. The courtyard begins to quiet as the day stretches lazily toward evening. You rise refreshed by dessert and curiosity both, and slip back into the sun. The heat has softened slightly, but the desert air still radiates like a sleeping beast. You head out of the city's edge again, following a small procession of men leading donkeys laden with straw bundles. They're on their way to gather the night's ice, and you now thoroughly invested in this whole desert snow mystery, decide to tag along. The procession winds down a narrow trail to a shallow basin just outside the Yakhchal's dome. At first glance, it looks like a dried-up irrigation pond, but it's cleverly designed sunken low, with high mud brick walls around 3 sides and open to the sky above. The earth here has been compacted and smoothed, creating a surface slick enough to freeze even the smallest layer of water, if the conditions are just right. And tonight they will be. The men begin preparing the basin. One spreads a thin layer of water from a ceramic jug, watching it spread out into a glossy mirror. Another begins to sing softly as he lays bundles of straw nearby. There's no rush, just rhythm. They've done this countless times. You crouch beside one of the older workers, who looks like he's been sun-dried himself. The trick, he says, his voice gravelly, is in the timing. We fill it just after sundown, when the air starts to drop, but before the wind dies. He points to the open sky above. No clouds. That's what we need. Clouds hold in heat. We want it to escape to go flying up into the stars and take the warmth with it. Radiative cooling, your modern brain whispers. But you stay quiet. Here it's more than science, it's a practiced ritual. Historians still argue whether these ice harvesting basins were standard at every yakhchal, or if they were a more regional adaptation. Some believe they were seasonal, only relying on the winter chill and the basin's shadowed design. Others insist they operated well into spring depending on altitude, humidity, and moon phase. Yes, moon phase. Some night workers swore full moons kept the basin too warm. The men finish layering the water. Then they leave it. No poking, no prodding, just faith. You're invited to stay the night well to doze beside a donkey while they wait. So you lie down on a woven mat, a thin blanket tossed over you, and gaze up at the brilliant dome of stars overhead. It's stunning how much sky you can see out here away from firelight. And then the breeze picks up. It rustles the reeds stacked nearby skips across your cheeks like a playful spirit, and finally kisses the surface of the basin. The water trembles, then settles into stillness. The night cools, the earth sighs. You drift in and out of sleep, the occasional laughter of the workers washing over you. Someone starts telling a story about a lion that once wandered into camp and tried to eat a frozen turnip. The details are sketchy, but the laughter is real. By dawn, the air is sharp and dry. You blink awake to find men scraping the basin with broad, flat blades. A thin crust of ice has formed, maybe just a few centimeters thick, but enough. They lift it carefully, slide it onto straw-lined trays, and stack it into the open yakhchal chamber like thin sheets of crystal. It's not much, but repeated over many nights, layer by patient layer, it becomes a fortress of frozen bounty. One of the workers hands you a shard. It's smoother than you expect, already starting to sweat in your palm. You place it on your tongue. Cold, clean, gone in a breath. And now you've joined the centuries-old club of desert dwellers who've tasted ice made under the stars. There's a certain magic to that. You stretch your arms and stand the early morning sun barely peeking over the rooftops. There's a gentle clatter of tools being gathered, the bray of a satisfied donkey munching on last night's straw, and the unmistakable sound of running water somewhere beneath your feet. It's time to talk about the secret plumbing of ancient Persia, an engineering marvel so subtle, so brilliant, you probably wouldn't even notice it unless someone pointed it out. You begin walking with a quiet group of laborers heading toward the edge of the city. The sun is still low, painting everything with a gold so soft it feels like it might drip off the rooftops. A boy with a reed flute provides a sleepy soundtrack as you stop near what looks like a small well. But this isn't a well, it's a portal. One of the workers pulls the covering aside and you lean over the edge. There's no bucket, no rope. Just a cool draft of air rising gently from below. It smells faintly of mineral stone and ancient stillness. This is a qanat. Qanats are ancient underground aqueducts developed thousands of years ago to carry water from highland springs to lowland cities without a single mechanical pump. They run for miles, sometimes tens of miles, dug by hand at a gradual, almost imperceptible slope. The result water flows on its own beneath the earth, shielded from evaporation and contamination. It's genius, and also a little terrifying, because people built these with little more than digging tools and nerve. You're led to a nearby tunnel entrance, a maintenance shaft really. A narrow path corkscrews down into darkness. You descend carefully, the air cooling with each step until you're standing in a stone corridor. A narrow trench cut into the floor carries a quiet stream. Your guide explains that this particular qanat connects a mountain spring nearly 15 kilometers away to the city center. She flows all year, he says, patting the stone like it's a beloved mule. Even in summer, when the sky forgets to cry. The water here doesn't rush. It creeps. Smooth, obedient, eternal. And that's the secret. The ice, the chilled storage, the cooling basins, they all depended on this slow, invisible artery beneath the ground. Without the qanat, there would be no yakhchal, no saffron ice cream, no rosewater desserts, just sand and sweat. Historians still argue over the origins of the qanat system. Some credit the Persians exclusively. Others point to early evidence in Mesopotamia or even bits of northern Africa. But Persia undoubtedly perfected it, spreading the technology across their empire like water itself into Egypt, Syria, and even parts of Spain. You walk alongside the water channel, stooping occasionally to avoid the low ceiling. Every few hundred feet, a vertical shaft opens to the surface, letting in beams of light and fresh air. It's through these access points that workers once dug and maintained the whole system, and occasionally where a goat would fall in and become a surprise guest. A breeze stirs the hair at your temple. You're far enough from the city now that the air feels different, cleaner, older somehow. You pause where the tunnel splits, one branch feeding a public bathhouse, the other heading straight toward the yakhchal. Your guide gestures. Come, you'll see something beautiful. You follow the second path until it widens into a chamber with a large stone basin. Here, workers would draw cool water and mix it with shaved ice from the vault above. They'd ladle it into amphorae or carry it in sloshing goatskin bags across the city. Imagine that a cup of chilled water drawn from underground and cooled with ice made from starlight, all without so much as a crank. You dip your hands into the stream. It's shockingly cold. And as the droplets slip through your fingers, you realize something. This wasn't just convenience. This was pride, identity. The qanat was more than plumbing, it was legacy. a quiet promise from generation to generation you will have water. You will have coolness, even in the fire of this land. You climb back to the surface, slowly squinting at the now rising sun. It seems gentler now, knowing what runs beneath it. And somewhere far below the water keeps flowing, a silver thread in a land of gold and dust. By mid-morning, the city hums to life like a slow-moving caravan. Merchants are rolling up woven canopies. The scent of frying onions and fresh bread mingles with the distant bray of a market mule who clearly doesn't want to be working today. You wander toward the heart of town, passing under archways and ducking between spice stalls, until a glint of sunlight on copper catches your eye. A small shaded stand is serving something in delicate bowls, each one resting on a cradle of cool clay. You step closer. A young woman smiles and lifts a wooden ladle from a lidded pot. Thick liquid drips slowly golden sweet and dotted with bits of what looks like crushed pistachio and threads of saffron. She hands you a bowl without asking. Shuriak traveler, she says. Milk ice. You take a sip. Cold, milky, fragrant. It's like the distant cousin of a milkshake if that milkshake had been raised on poetry and prayer rugs. Here it is again, the unmistakable taste of leisure, in a place that had every reason to abandon comfort. But comfort was everywhere if you knew where to look. A few paces away in the shadow of a domed bakery, you see two elderly women sitting on a bench, shaded by grapevines. One fans herself lazily while the other slices slivers of cucumber into a chilled bowl. Too hot for stew, one mutters. But not too hot for Abdul-Khiar. She winks. And just like that, you're handed a bowl of cold yogurt soup infused with mint basil crushed walnuts and tiny ice chips dancing on the surface. Not everything was made for survival. Some things were made for sighing with satisfaction. In ancient Persia, food and weather danced a strange and beautiful duet. Meals weren't just about what was available, they were about what would cool you down, soothe you, balance you. And nowhere was that philosophy more evident than in the gardens. You follow a narrow path through a wooden gate, stepping into an enclosed paradise. A chaharbag, a four-part garden divided by water channels. A geometric attempt to bring heaven to earth. Water trickles gently in marble-lined rivulets. Shade trees arch overhead pomegranate, fig, and cypress. The ground is cool beneath your sandals, packed with gravel that muffles your steps. Birds flit through the branches, gossiping like little merchants of the sky. This isn't just landscaping, it's strategy. The walls around the garden block the wind. The trees provide shade. The water, fed of course by qanats, cools the air as it evaporates. Together, they turn this tiny patch of land into a natural refrigerator. You sit on a stone bench near a small basin, watching the sun reflected in rippling water. Beside you, someone has left a half-melted scoop of sorbet, made with sour cherry juice and honey. It's warm enough to be a metaphor. Historians still debate how widespread refrigeration gardens like this were. Some say they were reserved for royal courts and religious complexes. Others argue they were more common than assumed private oases for families who knew the secrets of shade and silence. But no one denies their elegance. A boy dips a copper jug into the channel and pours water over a slab of stone that lines the garden's edge. Steam rises briefly as the stone sighs in relief. It's a game they play, cooling the sitting stones so guests can rest. This wasn't brute force cooling. This was subtle, seductive, passive. And somehow, despite the dust and the politics and the endless heat, it worked. A butterfly lands on your toe and stays there a moment, as if it too is resting in the logic of Persian design. You lean back, your bowl empty now. And though the air is warm, your body feels calm, your skin dry, cool even. And there's still more to discover, because soon you'll meet the camels. And they're hauling ice. You hear them before you see them, the rhythmic thump of hooves, the occasional grunt, and the gentle clatter of something solid knocking against wood. You follow the sounds out through the city gates and onto the old trade road already warmed by the sun. There, just beyond a bend in the path, comes the procession, a caravan of camels swaying like boats on a dusty sea, each bearing curious bundles draped in thick fabric and tied with ropes. The lead driver raises a hand in greeting, squinting through the heat shimmer. These aren't silk or spice traders, these are ice haulers. You step off the road and watch them pass, counting 6 camels in total. Their loads, large blocks of ice wrapped in straw burlap, and occasionally old animal skins. The insulation is surprisingly effective, especially for short to mid-range routes between Yakhchals and city centers, or into the homes of nobles who didn't want to risk sweaty afternoons. The driver chuckles as you trail beside them. She's carrying the cold, he says, patting one camel on the flank. Be careful she bites if you call her hot. You chuckle, and the camel glares at you anyway. Historians still argue how far ice could be realistically transported in ancient Persia. Some say no more than a day's journey, especially during summer. Others believe that with the right packing and pre-dawn departures, it was possible to get ice to regional outposts and along major trade routes. But everyone agrees it was an expensive luxury, something not wasted lightly. You walk alongside the caravan for a while, letting the steady rhythm of hoofbeats lull you into a kind of trance. There's something oddly soothing about it, this slow-motion ballet of humans and beasts moving frozen treasure through the heat. Occasionally, the haulers stop to repack. They dig into the straw, check the ice, mop away meltwater with rags, and adjust the coverings. A boy runs up from a roadside village with a fresh bundle of reeds, offering it for a coin and a story. He's given both. One hauler tells you that each block of ice is tagged not with numbers, but with painted symbols unique to the household that requested it. A lion for the governor, he says a sunburst for the temple. He points to one with a spiral. This one, the apothecary. He says cold keeps the herbs from lying. You pass a watchtower where a sleepy guard waves and calls out, "Anything for me." The hauler pretends to search, then shrugs, "Only frost," and regret. Everyone laughs, even the camel. Maybe. Soon the caravan stops at a roadside shrine shaded by a wide fig tree. The lead hauler opens a small side compartment in one of the bundles and pulls out a slab the size of your hand. It's sweating, dripping steadily onto the dirt. With a practiced gesture, he breaks it in two and drops one half into a bowl of tamarind water. The other half is handed to you. It's warm at the edges, but the center is still solid. You hold it to your forehead and nearly weep. This little shard of stubborn cold is the result of everything you've seen: the Yakhchal dome, the basin under the stars, the Qanot's secret veins, the saffron-scented courtyards. The hauler toasts you with his tamarind bowl, to summer, he says, and her occasional kindness. You sip, and it's like drinking the essence of shade itself. Before long, the caravan moves on. You walk with them a little longer, then bid them farewell, watching as they sway off into the golden dust ice gleaming faintly beneath layers of straw and thyme. It occurs to you then, this isn't just transport. This is choreography, climate control by camel, and there are still more stories to carry. The caravan fades into the shimmer of the horizon, leaving behind faint footprints, a bit of trampled straw, and the lingering coolness on your skin. You walk back toward the city, feet tracing well-worn paths, but your thoughts now drift somewhere older, somewhere deeper. You've tasted the ice. You've followed the flow of water. But tonight, beneath the temple's shadow and the stars slowly returning to the sky, you'll sit with something even more ancient, the rhythm of life shaped by the seasons. A bell chimes gently in the distance, not urgent, just a reminder. You follow its sound into a quiet district where the sun's last rays kiss the tops of mud brick walls. There, just beyond a wide gate, rises a low, solemn structure of pale stone, a Zoroastrian fire temple. You step inside with silent reverence. No one speaks loudly here. The central fire burns gently in a clay hearth, its flame tended by a priest with ash on his brow and patience in his eyes. The room smells of sandalwood and sacred intention. You settle near the doorway where the light flickers against the walls. A man beside you leans over and whispers, "This flame has burned for centuries. Like the seasons, it doesn't hurry." In Zoroastrianism, the natural world isn't just background scenery, it's central. Fire is purity. Water is life. Earth, air, heat, cold, all part of the divine order. And living in balance with those elements, that's the ultimate goal. You listen as the priest chants softly, his voice weaving around the flame like smoke. In this space, you begin to understand something vital. Refrigeration wasn't just about preserving food or easing the heat. It was about honoring cycles: winter into summer ice, into water, into life. Historians still debate how deeply religious practice influenced the development of climate-adaptive architecture in Persia. Some scholars believe the emphasis on elemental balance shaped everything from garden layout to storage vaults. Others argue that practical needs came first and the symbolism was added later. But sitting here in the firelight, you feel those two threads knotting together. Outside, the city moves slowly, guided by a calendar rooted in agriculture, astronomy, and sacred timing. The Persian year is divided not just by months, but by Gayhenbar's seasonal festivals, marking creation's 6 stages: sky, water, earth, plants, animals, and humankind. You step out again, the priest giving you a nod that somehow feels like a blessing. The stars are beginning to bloom above you. The temperature drops with that familiar nighttime grace, quick, quiet, unapologetic. On the walk back, you pass through a neighborhood where women gather in courtyards, sorting herbs and whispering recipes into each other's ears like they're telling ghost stories. They talk about when to start steeping the rose petals, how long the shaved ice should rest before it's poured over pickled barberries, which phase of the moon is best for storing basil in clay pots. You slow down to listen. No one minds. This isn't culinary superstition. It's inherited rhythm. These women have memorized the desert's moods. One beckons you over and presses something into your hand. A frozen plum sliced in half drizzled with syrup. Eat it slow, she says. Let it melt like winter leaving. It does. And somehow in that syrupy stillness, you realize something that scholars often miss in their scrolls and debates. The Persian mastery of cold wasn't just about resisting heat, it was about embracing time, waiting for the night, knowing when to harvest, when to bury, when to cool, and when to simply sit still and sip the world. As you reach the quiet edge of the city again, you pause beneath an olive tree. Above you, a windcatcher whispers. Below, the Qanat flows, and beside you, somewhere in the distance, a dome of earth and ice breathes gently beneath the stars. You're back at the Yakhchal now, though this time you approach it not as a visitor, but as someone who knows its heartbeat. The night has fallen fully, and the stars scatter like seeds across the velvet sky. The air is dry still and finally cool enough to walk, without your skin fighting you. From this angle, the Yakhchal looks even more impressive. It rises like a sleeping mountain, its curved dome absorbing the moonlight in soft ripples. You step closer and run your hand along its outer wall. The bricks are ancient but sturdy, each one sun-dried, not kiln-fired, and set with such care that even the passage of centuries hasn't shaken them loose. And you begin to notice the subtle geometry, the slope of the walls, the way the entrance sits just low enough to avoid the worst of the summer sun. The internal chambers align not randomly, but to maximize air circulation, shadow, and insulation. This wasn't trial and error. This was mathematics. Ancient Persian architects knew what they were doing. They understood angles thermodynamics, though they didn't call it that, and the importance of layering. The walls of a yakhchal were often a meter thick, built from a special mortar called saruj, made with clay lime sand, ash egg whites, and even goat hair. Waterproof, heat-proof, critic-proof. You step inside again this time, paying attention not to the temperature, but to the silence. It's almost perfect. Sound doesn't travel well in this dome, which is intentional. The acoustics help maintain stillness, keep the air undisturbed. There are vents above and ducts below, and they all serve one purpose: to let the hot air escape and draw the cool air down. You notice how the floor slopes inward, forming a bowl at the center where ice could settle naturally. Water runoff was channeled out through narrow stone drains, leading back into storage trenches or gardens. Even the smallest bit of melt had a second life. Historians still argue whether the exact shape of the yakhchal, often a pointed dome or paraboloid, was selected for aesthetic reasons or functional ones. Did the Persians study how airflow behaved in curved spaces? Did they design the walls to resist collapse from shifting ground or sudden weather? Likely both. But the effect remains a heat-proof vault made not by chance but by calculus in clay. You lie down on the floor for a moment, right where the ice would have been stored. The cool seeps into your back like being cradled by the belly of the earth. Above, the moonlight filters in through the vent, a perfect circle of silver that reminds you of the plum syrup just hours ago. There's a comforting rhythm to it all. The dome mirrors the sky, the cold mirrors the heat. Balance isn't just the goal, it's the architecture. In a society that mapped stars and seasons with equal care, it makes sense that the yakhchal wasn't just a storage unit, it was a philosophy in adobe. Even now in ruins, some of these structures remain intact across Iran and Central Asia, forgotten by many, but still standing, still defying the sun. One particularly quirky tidbit: some desert communities used yakhchals to store not just ice, but pickles. Yes, giant clay jars filled with brined vegetables buried beside ice blocks to ferment slowly and stay crisp. There's something magical about imagining a 12th century family gathering to enjoy chilled pickled turnips in a garden cooled by ancient physics. Outside, a soft breeze nudges through the entrance. You sit up and trace the curve of the dome with your eyes again. The Persians didn't just build for, now they built for later. And you're part of that later, resting in a building older than most languages still spoken. A building that breathes, a building that kept its promise. Coolness without fire, ice without electricity, harmony without hurry. You take one last deep breath, the air tinged with claytime, and a faint sweetness that may just be your imagination. Or it may be the memory of dessert. As you step back outside the yakhchal, the moon now riding high and full above you, you feel the temperature dip further. It's the kind of clean, dry cool that only desert nights can deliver, sharp at first, then mellow like the final notes of a well-played song. You wander toward the residential district, where the winding alleys of the city wait in a sleepy hush. But tonight you notice something new in the layout, something oddly intentional. It's not just where people built their homes, it's how they built them. The streets twist and coil in seemingly random patterns. But if you really pause, and look at the way shadows stretch and breezes flow, you realize these alleys are wind maps carved in clay. The Persians didn't leave climate control to chance, not even in the city grid. You duck into a narrow passage that suddenly opens into a quiet cul-de-sac. The air here feels different, still but breathable. It's slightly cooler, shielded from the breeze that howls on the outskirts. The buildings around you are tall and tightly packed with few windows on the lower levels. Why? To trap shade, to limit sun exposure, to funnel what little wind there is where it can do the most good. Even the color of the walls plays a role. Light mud plaster reflects heat. Darker sections absorb it only in places designed to release it at night. It's like every surface is part of a slow-motion conversation with the sun. You round a corner and stumble upon a small square where an open cistern sits like a sleeping pool. The water isn't for drinking, it's for cooling. As it evaporates, it brings the surrounding air temperature down by several degrees, just enough to make a difference. Nearby, a woman waters a patch of basil with a clay jug. She sees you and smiles. "Hot today?" she asks, already knowing the answer. "Wait 10 minutes. The alley turns." You chuckle. She's right. Historians still argue whether Persian cities were intentionally designed as massive climate management machines, or if the cooling effects were just a happy byproduct of necessity. But when you see alleyways angled to avoid direct sunlight, homes clustered tightly for shade, and open spaces spaced just far enough to invite air without scorching the earth, well, coincidence feels a little too convenient. One particularly clever design features sardabs, or underground summer rooms. Built below the main living quarters, these chambers were accessed by narrow stairwells and lit by high, indirect windows. Naturally cool, naturally quiet. You descend into one tucked behind a modest home, the owner's long asleep. The room is bare, just a simple mat, a clay pitcher of water, and a niche in the wall where someone's placed a sprig of mint. The air down here feels like the inside of a whisper. You sit and listen, not just to the wind catchers above or the distant call of a nightbird, but to the idea of a city that doesn't fight its climate, but flows with it. Even the bathhouses you've heard were designed with temperature control in mind. Some had separate chambers for cold and hot seasons. Others used qanat-fed basins for soaking in water that never saw the sun. And always, always there was balance. The heat served the cold. The architecture served the earth. The cities served the people without making war against nature. Back on the surface, you walk again, this time letting the alleys guide you. The curves feel organic now. You're not lost, you're cooled. At a rooftop cafe still open despite the hour, someone sips a sherbet made from ground sour plums and snow. You're offered one without asking. It's tart and refreshing, and you take your time with it. Because here, even movement slows for the sake of comfort. Even cities take a breath before sunrise. And even alleyways can carry wisdom. The rooftop cafe begins to dim its lanterns as the hour grows quiet and heavy. You step down the clay stairs, sherbet still lingering on your tongue, and wander through a quieter part of town. The doors here are older, the windows small and shuttered. But in one courtyard behind a delicate wooden screen, voices murmur and something fragrant simmers. You slow your steps. Peeking through the carved screen, you glimpse a small gathering women of various ages sitting cross-legged on cushions, the light from a hanging oil lamp pooling over spice jars, copper pots, and a bowl of crushed rose petals. One woman, her hands veined like tree roots, is grating what looks like dried limes into a wide bowl of yogurt. She stirs slowly, rhythmically. Another is gently fanning a clay tray filled with shaved ice, coaxing it into a soft pile before it's topped with lavender syrup. You step closer. The screen creaks slightly, and instead of surprise or scolding, the women smile. "Come in," one says, as if they've been expecting you. You enter, and the warmth is immediate, not just from the small brazier at the center of the group, but from the sense of welcome. One of the younger women presses a bowl into your hands. "Cucumber yogurt, dill mint, and yesterday's snow," she says with a grin. "The real cure for a desert brain." You sip, it's crisp, earthy, and utterly calming. And as you settle in, the conversation turns to recipes. Not just any recipes, preservation recipes. They talk about drying herbs in shade, not sun. About storing fruits in cool underground chambers cushioned in layers of rose petals and rice husks. about clay jars that sweat just enough to keep contents cold, and about the one that draws your attention most, making rosewater ice. Historians still debate whether Persian women led these culinary and cooling innovations or inherited them from earlier domestic traditions. Some accounts elevate elite households as centers of experimentation. Others suggest village kitchens held the real secrets. What's agreed upon is this: women weren't just preserving food, they were preserving knowledge. One older woman pulls a thin scroll from behind a jar and carefully unrolls it. Written in fading ink are not just ingredients and ratios, but times of day seasons and lunar notes. Everything matters, she says, tapping the edge. Too early in the morning, and the rose turns bitter. Too late at night, and the ice will run. Another adds, even gossip changes the taste. You can't tell if she's joking. You're handed a square of candied quince chilled between thin leaves of ice and told to eat it between sips of bitter tea. It melts slowly, releasing its syrup like a secret. A child runs in with a shallow bowl and whispers something to her grandmother. The older woman nods and hands over a pinch of dried violet. This one's for calming dreams, she says, best stored beside the ice for 2 nights. There's something sacred here, not in a religious sense, but in the reverence for detail, the patience, the intimacy. The cold wasn't only kept in chambers and domes, it lived in gestures, in rituals. You look around and notice that nearly every jar is labeled not just with content, but with the name of the woman who sealed it and the season it was made. That one's Aunt Mernaz's summer pickle, someone says. Still crunchy 3 years later. Even preservation was personal. There's laughter, of course. Someone jokes that her mother-in-law could freeze sunshine if she had a big enough pot. Someone else shares the story of the time her son tried to hide a pet lizard in the ice chest and ended up with a very confused, very cold surprise. You lose track of time in the flicker of the lamp and the clink of copper spoons. Eventually, you thank them and step back into the night. They wave casually, already passing down more rose petals and notes for next year's saffron milk cubes. And as you walk away, bowl still warm in your hand, you realize something. The knowledge of cold wasn't hoarded in scrolls or towers. It was whispered in kitchens. It was preserved in hearts. You follow the cobbled path out of the courtyard, stepping back into the silver hush of night. Your belly is full, your breath slow, but your curiosity is still wide awake. As you make your way toward the outskirts of the city, you hear a different sound: drums, faint horns, and the unmistakable chaos of frustrated yelling. You round a corner and stumble upon a sight that feels straight out of a comedy scroll. A camp of soldiers, foreign ones clearly not from around here, stands in complete disarray. Tents are half collapsed, camels look unimpressed, and in the middle of it all, several men are crowded around what appears to be a puddle. "Where's the ice?" shouts a red-faced officer. "It was solid this morning." You can't help but grin. Welcome to the age-old tale of invaders trying and failing to replicate Persian brilliance. Turns out this particular band of would-be conquerors tried to reverse engineer a yakhchal after seeing one in the city. They figured, hey, it's just a big dome with a pit, right? Wrong. You watch as they bicker over bricks, straw placement, and something about digging deeper for extra cold. One soldier suggests blowing into the pit to speed up the chill. Another has brought a massive cloth fan and is waving it with the enthusiasm of a man who absolutely does not understand thermodynamics. Historians still laugh while debate about the attempts made by Greeks, Romans, and even later European travelers to replicate Persian ice systems. Some tried building their own yakhchals in Egypt. Others copied the concept but couldn't quite grasp the subtle balance of wind shadow and geometry. The most successful mimics, usually those who hired local Persian engineers to do the actual work. Go figure. You sit on a rock and observe the chaos. A local boy walks by and offers one of the foreign soldiers a chilled plum. The man accepts it gratefully, takes a bite, and immediately spits it out. It's sour. What kind of treat is this? The boy just laughs and runs off. Meanwhile, the puddle continues to grow. The officers grow redder. The camels look bored. You notice that their version of a yakhchal lacks several critical features: no qanat to provide steady water, no proper slope or drainage, and their wind catcher is really just a hole plugged with a wine jug. It's like watching someone try to bake a cake with sand and hope. A few curious locals gather on a hill nearby to watch the spectacle. One of them whispers, "They forgot the night." You turn to him. The night. He nods. They think cold comes from tools, but cold comes from waiting, from stillness. And that's it, really. The Persians didn't force cold. They invited it. The would-be engineers finally give up trudging off to argue under a sagging canopy. One kicks the ground. Another tries to blame the camels. The puddle gurgles in response. You head back toward the city, a soft smile playing at your lips. It's comforting in a way that something so seemingly simple, ice in the desert, could be so complex, so local, so unstealable. You pass a child playing with a frozen lemon slice on a string, spinning it like a toy in the starlight. Nearby, someone tosses a scoop of snow into a basin for rinsing figs. The breeze rustles gently through the palms, and in the distance, the Yakhchal looms serene as ever. The desert hasn't changed. The sun still scorches. But the Persians, with nothing but clay starlight and time, found a way to cool it down. And no invader, no matter how loud or sweaty, can take that away. The night deepens, blanketing the city in velvet shadows and hush. You make your way back toward the quieter edges again, curiosity drawing you to a ruin just beyond the last flickering torch. It's a collapsed yakhchal, its dome caved in, long ago, its base half swallowed by sand and time. But there's something about the place. You step carefully into what's left of the entrance broken bricks, crunching softly underfoot. The air is still cooler here. Even in ruin, the structure remembers how to breathe. A few stones have been cleared away, revealing the inner chamber. Grass pokes up between the cracks, but the circular pit remains a dark hollow, lined with chipped plaster and faded symbols. You sit on the edge, legs dangling above the long, empty basin. Scholars have been here before, clearly. Someone has placed a few small markers with handwritten notes in faded ink. One reads vault depth, R 5.7 drainage, unknown. Another says, evidence of late reuse in Qajar period. You run your fingers along the brickwork. It's rougher here, hastily patched in places. A kind of restoration, maybe, or desperation. Historians still argue about how long the Yakhchals stayed in use. Some believe they gradually fell out of favor as mechanical refrigeration arrived in the 19th century. Others think they persisted well into the early 20th century in rural areas, especially in places where electricity remained a rumor rather than a reality. Some of the stories passed down say that this very structure was used during a great drought when even the kanats ran dry. The community rationed the last blocks of ice for the sick, the very old, and the newborns. When the final slab melted, they buried the last of it under rose petals and prayers. You rest your palms against the brick and close your eyes. You can almost hear the voices, not loud, just murmurs. The scrape of tools, the shuffle of bare feet, the laughter of someone balancing a too large chunk of ice on their head like a crown. There's something reverent about this ruin. It's not just about what was lost. It's about what was possible. And still is. Because here's the thing. No one tells you Yakhchals are making a comeback. In recent decades, architects and environmentalists have begun studying these ancient structures with fresh eyes. Passive cooling, sustainable storage, zero electricity. These aren't just relics. They're blueprints for a hotter future. One particularly quirky tidbit: in 2016, an Iranian engineering team successfully built a modern Yakhchal replica in the arid plains outside Kerman. Using only traditional materials and methods, they managed to produce and store ice again, just like the ancestors. Historians debate how scalable this revival is. Could we integrate these systems into modern urban landscapes? Would people accept a dome of mud brick in their backyard instead of a humming metal fridge? No one agrees, but everyone seems intrigued. You lean back, looking up at the stars through the broken dome. A few bricks frame the sky like a cracked lens. The breeze slides in, gently curling around your ankles and rustling the weeds. This broken yakhchal, once forgotten, now serves a different purpose. It reminds of patience, of cleverness, of cold made without noise. You rise slowly, brushing dust from your hands. The silence here isn't empty, it's rich, layered with the memory of cold mornings, clever hands, and nights spent waiting for frost to form in moonlight. As you step away, you catch a final glint of light on the curve of a buried vent, half covered by sand but still perfectly angled, like it's waiting for someone to try again. And maybe you will. You walk slowly now, each step measured as if the city itself has lulled you into its rhythm. There's no need to rush. You've tasted its ice, felt its breath through kanat and windcatcher, and now stood in the shadow of both triumph and decay. But even the most enduring wonders eventually fade. And this one was no different. As you approach the edge of the marketplace, long closed its stalls covered with woven mats, you pass the outlines of what once might have been a bustling public yakhchal. Its dome is gone, its pit filled in, and in its place, a dusty roundabout where tired mopeds sputter past and stray cats lounge like they've inherited the earth. There's no plaque, no marker, but locals know. An old man sweeping his stoop nods at the circle. "Ice used to sleep there," he says with a wink. You smile. "So what happened?" Why, if the system was so brilliant, so efficient, so shockingly elegant, did it vanish? The short answer, progress. The longer one is more complicated. With the rise of industrialization and imported technologies, electric refrigeration promised convenience without all the waiting labor and seasonal dependency. Governments modernized cities, swelled, and many ancient systems were paved over in favor of faster, shinier solutions. The sacred rhythm of the night-frozen basin and wind-whispered dome gave way to the humming box in the kitchen corner. Historians still argue whether the decline of Yakhchals was inevitable or whether it was a failure of imagination, a moment when humanity mistook new for better. Some say they couldn't keep up with population growth and urban sprawl. Others believe that given time, Yakhchals could have evolved, blended with modern systems, become something hybrid and powerful. But the truth is, they were left behind. Many were dismantled for materials. Others were simply abandoned, left to crack under wind and sand. In a few cases, they became makeshift shelters for animal squatters, or even storage for things utterly unpoetic like oil drums and bicycle parts. But not all was lost. In some villages, elders kept the memory alive. Children learned to mimic the curved lines in their sketches. Gardeners remembered the trick of cooling water jars with shade and mist, and those who cared really cared continued to tell the story. Like tonight, you sit at the edge of a stone fountain, no longer flowing but still beautifully carved. You think of all you've seen, the cold carved under stars, the saffron deserts kissed with snow, the failed invaders baffled by straw and silence. You think of the quiet revolution of women freezing herbs by moonlight, and the architects who taught clay to whisper. And it strikes you Yakhchals didn't die. They rested, waiting for a world hot and crowded enough to need them again. And we are that world now. Already modern cities search for passive cooling techniques. Already architects look backward to move forward, embracing earth domes, underground reservoirs, evaporative systems. Already the Yakhchal begins to stir in the dreams of engineers and artists alike. One particularly poetic theory that if you rebuilt a series of Yakhchals across the ancient Silk Roads, link them with solar-powered qanats and public gardens, you could cool entire regions using nothing more than time, wind, and trust. Would it work maybe? Would it be beautiful? Absolutely. And even if not, wouldn't it be worth the effort just to see that first slab of starlight-formed ice stacked in a dome of mud brick once again? You close your eyes. The fountain is silent. The wind is soft. And somewhere beneath the dust, the old systems still breathe. You make your way to the very edge of the city now, where the desert begins again, quiet and endless as if holding its breath. One last Yakhchal stands here, partially restored, partially original, and entirely still. It waits. You duck through its low entrance once more, but this time it's not as a guest, not even as a curious observer. You're here now as a keeper of memory, of rhythm, of the kind of ancient magic that didn't require spells, just geometry, patience, and a reverence for the night sky. Inside, the air is cool and still. No ice, no guards, no workers, just the echo of centuries. You lie down gently on the packed earth floor, the curve of the dome rising above you like a protective sky. The silence here is thick, but never lonely. You hear things that aren't there. Voices of builders muttering about dome angles, someone arguing over straw bundles, a child's laugh as a chip of ice falls down her shirt. All gone, all here, and so you rest. You feel the breeze from the high vent above, faint but steady, tracing over your cheeks. The scent of dust, clay, and a trace of old rosewater fills your lungs. You close your eyes. You imagine the stars above, how many blocks of ice were formed beneath their watchful gaze, how many nights were spent waiting for frost to shimmer on the surface of still water. You picture the camel caravans trudging through morning heat with sweating bundles, the laughter of women teaching their daughters how to balance cold bowls on their palms, the scribes mapping shade angles onto parchment. This wasn't just engineering, it was poetry made practical. You wonder how many modern inventions could ever claim such grace. Historians still wonder whether the techniques were truly lost or simply tucked away in the minds of those who didn't think anyone was still listening. But you're listening. You've walked their streets, tasted their ice, breathed their architecture. And now in this moment of stillness, you carry it all. The sun will rise soon. The heat will come again. But for now, this chamber, this miracle, holds you in its arms like one of its own. The air hums gently through the vents. The earth beneath you remains cool, and the dome above watches in silence. You drift, not away from history, but deeper into it. Not away from time, but folded softly inside it. Sleep comes not with a crash, but with a sigh. And in your final breath before dreams, cool air, old stone, and the memory of night-made ice. Word count. Oh, I 4. Wind down 300 words. And now as you lie there in the hush of this ancient dome, let the story fade like the warmth from a desert stone after sunset. Breathe in slowly. The air is calm, soft, steady. You're wrapped not in blankets, but in centuries of quiet craft layers of brick, straw, and moonlight. The wind above still moves gentle and distant, whispering across the mouth of the vent, just enough to remind you that everything is still flowing even now. There's nothing left to chase, no final fact to learn. The Persians knew that not all progress is noise. Sometimes it's silence perfected. Let the geometry cradle your thoughts. Let the shape of the dome soften your edges. Let your breath follow the same slow rhythm that froze water under stars that carried cold on the backs of camels, that taught the desert how to sigh. You are safe here. You are part of something older than machines, wiser than formulas. A quiet, deliberate kind of brilliance. So let go. Let your eyelids grow heavier. Let your thoughts dissolve like the last shard of ice melting on a copper plate. This moment is enough. This quiet is earned. This cool is yours. Sleep well, time traveler. You've walked through fire to find frost. You've come home to stillness. End of script. Sweet dreams.